on. Did you want to share some experiences?
Two things stick out in my life and will always,
Closer to your mouth. The microphone, just a little closer to your mouth.
and always will be, the suicide crash that we had in our gun tub. It was 5 guns, 20 millimeters, and 3 guys was on each gun. I was a passer, passed the ammunition to the loader. And 10 guys, the suicide plane crashed right in our gun tube. We shot him down, but the engine still hit the ship, and the explosion of the gas caused those guys that got burned up. Well, they was burned on, you can recognize them. And as I stated before, 2 guys applied for it's the highest award that the Navy was given.
The Medal of Honor.
Yeah, and those guys applied for it, and they told them to keep denying them. Said that they didn't give black guys a Medal of Honor. That's what it were. The black guys didn't get a Medal of Honor, but these guys didn't give up until they got it. And when they get it, it was in the paper. I got a clipping home. Both of them died about 3 years later. In another instant, a Marine, our barracks was 3 down decks below the surface of the water. And when we have reveille, that means you had to report to your station, your gun station. And this Marine was going up the hatch, trying to head him in. I didn't know him, but we had 150 Marines aboard ship. And soon as this guy's head came out of that hatch, a bullet, whatever it was, cut his head off. And he fell back on me. And I said it was nothing but the grace of the Lord. I could have been in his place. But I had to keep going to my station. And those 2 things bothered me a long time after I got out of service. In my dream, I would see those guys. But I got over it. Thanks the Lord.
Hold on to the mic. So we'll just go you and then Mr. Salmer. You go first. Yeah.
Well, as I believe I mentioned before, that I was a rifle platoon commander as a lieutenant on the island of New Britain. The environment there was very much like Guadalcanal. It was a very thick jungle and rainforest. But on New Britain, we had something else. We had tremendous rainstorms, and every day it would rain and rain and rain. And in fact, we would have our vehicles would be in mud up to their axles and so forth, and you were wet and miserable all the time, and there were a lot of cases of malaria, and I happened to contact malaria, and I had attacks about 7 or 8 times while I was out in the Pacific. But that was just to tell you what kind of conditions we were fighting in there. And after that, well, I might say, too, the fighting itself was somewhat different than it was later on as we traveled up through the Pacific into Peleliu and then Okinawa. We did a lot of, we had an airfield on New Britain, and that was about the biggest and most important objective there, except for Rabaul, which was down on the on the tip of the island, and that had about 33,000 Japanese there. It was a big staging and training area, and so forth. But with the Battle of Midway, and some of these gentlemen were in, we had made our mark on the Japanese Navy. They did not enjoy the air superiority that they had on when we were on Guadalcanal, and as a result, after we took most of the island, we had cut the Japanese garrison off and the air and sea power we had rendered them just dying on the vine there. They couldn't get resupplied. They couldn't get their supplies out, and our planes and naval gunfire and so forth worked them over pretty good, so they suddenly became a non-entity, and we had taken the airfield, and that was just about the end of that. We went back to, after Guadalcanal, the division went to Australia, and they were treated very well, and I think they should have been, because if we had not taken Guadalcanal, I think Australia would have been invaded. And the people there appreciated us very much. So there were a lot of parties and a lot of good fun. And in addition to that, we restaged and got ready for the next battle, which was New Britain. After New Britain, we went back to a little island near Guadalcanal called Pavuvu. It was a terrible place. The Marines had a very, very colorful term for the place, but it cannot be described or mentioned in this company. But all I can say is that it had a huge coconut plantation that was owned by Colgate Palmolive Pete. We had to cut down the coconut trees to even put up tents. Now, we were supposed to getting R&R there, understand. We had to, there was nothing there whatsoever except jungle and coconut trees. And incidentally, for every coconut tree we had to cut down, we had to pay Colgate Palmolive Pete, I think, or Uncle Sam did, had to pay him $50 for each tree. So, but anyway, we were in that paradise, and we finally made it halfway tolerable, and we trained, and we got replacements in, and so forth, and staged for the next operation, which was Peleliu. Now, many people, I'm sure that there's some people in here that have never heard of that place. And there's a good reason for that. The casualty rate was very high, and arguably it was the most costly battle of the war in terms of casualties, if you measure them by square yardage of territory taken. It was an island that was about 2 miles wide at its longest point, and about 8 miles long. So I guess we were dealing with about 15 square miles there. It was just a piece of coral that came right up out of the ocean. It was the ground was just as like cement. We couldn't dig foxholes, it was so hard. On that little island, there was an airfield, and there was some very high ground. There were interlocking ridges and draws and so forth. And they were all tunneled out by the Japanese. They had in there their galleys, their kitchens, their hospital facilities, their barracks, and so forth. So there were like a bunch of moles living in the ground. And they had prepared that ever since 1920 when they got it from the Germans. And as I say, I made three operations there, but that one has a special place in my heart because we lost so many people in such a short time. When it was all over, nobody ever heard of it, and that was because Admiral Nimitz, Admiral Halsey said we didn't have to take it. General MacArthur wanted it to protect his flank when he went into the Philippines. But despite the fact that Nimitz and Halsey said they could support the Philippines without taking this place, this island, the issue went to President Roosevelt, and he came to Pearl Harbor. He listened to both sides of the story, and he said the operation will go. So we wound up going and fighting that battle. And you've heard Korea referred to as the Forgotten War. That was the forgotten battle of World War II, in my view. So I say I got hit. I had a rifle platoon. I landed with 44 men of myself. I got hit on the 11th day of the battle. I had about 8 people left out of my 44. I was not unusual. This was about the same numbers would apply to all light type units throughout the division. So after Peleliu, which we did secure, and after about, about 6 weeks, out of a division of men of, say, 20,000, division would have been about 20,000 troops with their supporting units. It took something like 1,360 rounds of ammunition to kill every Japanese on that island. And we had to kill all but 400 of the 13. They would not give up. So we really won the battle in the first couple weeks. But they were fighting a war of attrition, and their objective was to make it so difficult for us that we would just give up. They didn't think they would have the stomach to hold out. And after that, we went on to Okinawa, and you've all heard of Okinawa. And I had a rifle platoon there. I got through that without a scratch, and but I will say this, that there were a couple of defining moments in my career, and one was, I guess the proudest moment was when I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And the most defining moment was when I was given a group of 44 young Marines to lead in combat. I was only a couple years older than most of them myself. And that, I think, is the greatest responsibility that a young man could ever have. Because you were the...
Let Mr. Soffer go. We'll come back.
I have a couple of real memories. In case anybody at the end of this is over wants to see it, I have some in my folder. I have a picture of President Bush aboard our ship picking the World War II unknown soldier's casket. And there's a picture of it in my folder, and a picture of the ambassador of Australia receiving the bell after our ship was decommissioned. There's also a picture in that folder of a Japanese torpedo hitting our ship and the Jap plane going down in water. You all can see it. It's in my folder. My other memory, I was detached to a little town near Cape Hatteras called Manio. It was nothing but a dirt road. And in late 42, we used to stand at Cape Hatteras and wave to the German submarines. They were off the coast. You could see them. They'd wave at us. We only had 20 men there, a doctor and a dentist and a few other people. One evening, we were called out to go out, and we had a PT boat there. One of the ships, the merchant ships, had been torpedoed, and we went out and rescued some of the seamen. One of the seamen was from Sweden. He had cut lips and cut face, and we took care of him. And he gave me a little ring, which I have home. It had been given him by his daughter.
second. Before we continue on, I know that there's a lot of difficult memories that you have, and certainly some of you have shared some memories that are hard to express, because the war is a moment in history that people who haven't experienced it can't possibly imagine. But to move in sort of a different direction, I've spoken to a few of you about different memories that you had, and I know for Mr. Casey specifically, I heard one or two stories that had a little bit of levity and a little bit of, in some cases, comedy to them. Do any of you have any pleasant memories from the war, specific things that you remember that are good memories that you have from the war themselves that you would like to share? If I could just share one that you had expressed to me, we were
Which one was that?
The one where we have the gentleman that got seasick.
What?
The gentleman that got seasick. Well, we had when you were coming in to Utah Beach on June 6, 1944.
Yes.
There was a gentleman from the South that had a boat company. I think it was a shrimping company. He owned a number of boats. Owned a company. Was out on the water every single day of his life, pretty much. And he was the only guy to get seasick, coming in on the landing craft coming into Utah Beach. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, were there any other stories that had some comedic aspects to them, or things that had a little bit of levity to it?
Well, going back to the beach, on the landing craft, there's quite a few experiences that you could go on. And one was to take, and I think they call it Atabrain with a seasick pill in the thing. Fortunately, up to this moment, I've never been seasick or airsick, and I've been in every position on a boat, the airplane you can get in, I suppose. And I didn't want to take the pill, and the medic went and told Lieutenant Worth that I refused to take the pill. And so he came back and said the lieutenant wanted to talk to me, and I went to talk to the lieutenant, and he was so sick he couldn't turn up, and he was pale as a sheet. And so he said, "You need to take the pill." I said, "All right, yes, sir." And I said, "Is that a direct order?" He said, "That's a direct order." I said, "Thank you, sir." And then my horns got a little long, and I got a little mischievous, and I turned around and I said, "By the way, Lieutenant, did you take your pill today?" And then this graduate voice would get out of here.
Does anybody else have any specific stories? Anything with some levity in terms of the war itself? Things that you remember that were? And anybody else have any stories?
I had one little occasion happen.
You want to pass in the microphone? Right here.
When I first boarded the USS Canberra, not knowing what was what, where what, I was walking up the starboard side and went, was a cabin there, and I said, "Oh, I'm go in and see what's going on." The next thing I knew, a Marine had me by the neck. He said, "You're in the Admiral's cabin." I said, "Well, I just came aboard. I didn't know what was what." He said, "Well, you better find out real quick." And that was funny.
Either of you gentlemen? Did either of you gentlemen have a story that you wanted to?
The only time I remember being seasick, we had a typhoon, and that was on the Marshall Islands. And I don't know if they read about it in the United States or not, but they lost the post office, and nobody didn't get no mail for over a month because it got lost in that typhoon. And I was on a 45,000 ton aircraft carrier, and I had to look at those guys on those little destroyers and used to feel for them, because every time you hit a stone, it would go all the way under. The only thing would be up is the what do you call it, the thing that gives
Top
signal.
mast. Radio tower, top mast.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I was on a heavy ship, I mean, and plus that airplanes and trucks and everything on it. And that stone really wagged a lot. And that's the only time I remember getting seasick. But I was always trying to keep something in my stomach, because that's what they would tell you. They're always trying to eat something. And that would hinder you from getting seasick. That was my problem.
Okay.
Well, I guess I don't think I can compete too much with these guys. I listen to all these sea stories from my left and right. I will say, though, that we went back, my wife and I took my wife back on a beautiful trip to Peleliu to celebrate the 50th anniversary of our landing on Peleliu. We were invited back for that event. And I know I was walking through the battlegrounds and so forth, and thinking about everything that happened there. And it cost me about $6,000 to get there. And I thought, what in the heck am I doing back here? The last time I saw it, I never wanted to see it again. I never wanted to hear anything about it. And there I was. I don't know why, like a magnet, it just drew me back. So I know it's not an amusing story, but I think it's a story that, to me, I still can't figure out why I went back. Except maybe it was a little bit of purging, and maybe that did me some good. I don't know. But anyway, it was pretty hard to compete with some of these guys here, though.
All right. Thanks. All right, I got one. I know from the time I want to give the audience the ability to ask some questions. So I'm just going to ask one last question of all of you, and I'd like to have all of you respond to this, and then we'll open up to the audience. If you could convey your thoughts about the Second World War to the generations that have come after you and individuals in the audience who are younger than you and the current generation growing up, what would you like to convey to them about the Second World War in general? Just a sort of general idea. And we can start with Mr. Casey and then work our way down.
Well, I've said early on, war is unnecessary to me, but there's been wars and rumors of war, and there'll always be war. If I had my way, there would never be another war. But I like the book that wrote about the greatest generation and that I was a part of. During World War II, there was a lot of sacrifices in this country. Food rationing and so forth, and most of a lot of people was in service. There was 4 in my family in service, and all of us went overseas. There's very tough times, and people sacrificed a lot. But then when I got over in Europe and I saw these things, and particularly the Battle of the Bulge, and I guess I liked all the people. I didn't get kicked out of any of the countries, but I have a favorite memory for the Belgian people, because during the Battle of the Bulge, it's so cold and they sacrificed so much and did for us. And I just like to tell you, just remember that there's World War II folks in the history. If you know anyone, talk to them.
Thank you. Just make sure you hold that closer to your mouth. Yeah.
My statement is similar to my mate. I was on an aircraft carrier, and the crew on it was 36,000 besides soldiers. And every month, the end of every month, they would dump all that food that was carried over in the sea. And I heard from people back home that the ration and a lot of stuff they couldn't even get. Even gasoline was rationing. And we were wasting it overseas because they call it stagnated when it lasts over a month.
And just hold on to that.
Well, I would say, in talking about the war in general, and I think that it just showed what a great country we are. We fought that. We just came out of we were coming out of a Great Depression. We were not prepared for the war, but it didn't take us long to get prepared. That's because everybody at home turned to the defense industries, and people at home, they all had a stake in the game, I would say. They all had skin in the game. They either had brothers, sisters, so forth, or friends who were in the services. It's not like today. These fellows are out here, today they're fighting, and nobody really thinks about them all that much, because we have a volunteer service, and our lives have not changed. We don't have the rationing that we had today, and our lives have not changed at all because there's a war on. It was not that way in World War II, as this gentleman pointed out. So but the way we came back and the resilience of this country and the can-do spirit of our country is something that was just amazing and unbelievable. And I also think that the military services did a tremendous training job. The Marine Corps had about 5,000 men in the 30s. That 1,000 men went up to about 450,000 during the war. In such a short time, and they had these people trained. All the services likewise did the same thing. So I think it was a great tribute to the people that stayed at home as well as the people that were out there fighting the war.
I think he just said what I was going to say. I know we all had a battle, but none of it would have happened if it hadn't been for Rosie the Riveter and all the other people that did the job. And I think today, one of the biggest mistakes we've ever made was stopping the draft. I think every kid that turns 18 could serve 2 years in the service in peacetime and come out responsible and men. It'll teach them what responsibility is all about.